Vera Gu had grown up in a traditional Chinese household, though the customs had thinned with each generation they'd spent in the West. But the expectations remained, thick as old blood, hard as bone. She'd spent her entire adult life trying to be a good daughter, a good citizen, a good professional. And for what? When Vera pushed open the heavy door of the notary office's VIP room, two factions were already seated inside. On the left sat her greedy aunt and her good-for-nothing cousin, one in a second-hand Chanel suit, the other in a garish streetwear t-shirt, with a printed will spread across the table, supposedly her father's final words. On the right, only one seat remained empty. Helen Gu tapped the table with crimson nails. "Your father said it all, billions in assets go to my son. You get nothing but a crumbling brick house in the suburbs." Vera didn't argue. She pulled 3 files from her briefcase. The first, a forensic psychiatric report proving her father had been in a deep coma when the will was signed. The second, bank records showing the so-called impartial witnesses were one man who owed Vera's cousin a gambling debt and another who worked for his shell company. The third, a complete paper trail of 45 million yuan embezzled from her father's company. Vera closed the folder and glanced at the blue sky through the window. She had won this game before she walked through the door, because she hadn't come with pieces. She'd come with the whole board. Summer in the coastal city of Haicheng came on fierce and fast, but inside the landmark notary building downtown, the air conditioning ran like it cost nothing, holding the entire floor at a steady 20 degrees Celsius. Once the VIP room door closed, the noise of the outside world was completely shut out, leaving only a cold, solemn stillness. The air smelled strange. Half of it was the cloying, almost choking scent of Helen's expensive agarwood incense, the top-grade stuff she'd had shipped from Vietnam, which she burned in her closet for half an hour every morning so she could feel like a real socialite. The other half was the cheap cologne still clinging to the t-shirt her son Mark had worn to a bar the night before, drinking until 3 in the morning and then pulling the same shirt back on without washing it. The two odors mixed like some low-grade chemical reaction, spreading through this space that was supposed to be dignified and formal, making everyone vaguely uncomfortable. At the long rosewood conference table, 2 camps sat in stark opposition. On the left, Helen and her precious son Mark. Helen was 53. Time hadn't been particularly kind to her. Thick foundation couldn't hide the crow's feet at the corners of her eyes, and her carefully maintained face was etched with petty cunning and sharp calculation. Today she'd worn a Chanel tweed suit, navy blue, with delicate gold thread tassels at the collar and cuffs. It was last season's style, picked up at a second-hand luxury store the year before, but wearing it still let her preen in front of the mirror for quite a while. Around her neck hung an imperial green jade pendant, the size of a pigeon's egg, the color so rich it looked almost liquid. It had been a birthday gift from her brother David 3 years ago, when his company went public. Helen had just moved back into the family mansion then, shamelessly, and David, always sentimental about family, had dropped nearly $1 million on that single piece. Now Helen drummed her crimson-nailed forefinger impatiently against the rosewood tabletop, the tap-tap-tap like a countdown to something dreadful. Mark was 24, with that trendy undercut hairstyle, shaved close on the sides and long on top. He sprawled in his high-backed chair, legs crossed, the soles of his limited-edition sneakers pointed insolently at the opposite side of the room. A folding screen phone was clutched in his hand, his thumbs flew across the screen, and every few seconds he'd curse under his breath. Fuck. This jungle idiot, what the hell is he doing? Having a baby in the bushes. Jesus, support, are you blind? I'm at 0 health here, you can't see that. His voice was jarringly loud in the quiet room. His t-shirt, some limited edition streetwear brand, featured a huge fluorescent logo that seemed to pulse under the lights, cheap and gaudy. On the right sat only one person. Vera. She sat like a porcelain figurine pulled from an ice cellar. No, more still than a statue, colder than porcelain. A perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, cut to her exact measurements, shoulders, waist, sleeves, every inch calibrated. The fabric was Italian wool blend with subtle dark threading that only caught the light at certain angles, understated to the point of severity. Beneath the jacket, a pure white silk blouse, top button fastened. Her long hair was pulled back low with a gray silk ribbon, not a single strand loose. In front of her sat nothing but a glass of warm water, in her own thermos, frosted matte, and a thick, heavily thumbed copy of the Civil Code, its spine worn, pages marked with dozens of colored tabs. Her face was beautiful. Not the dazzling kind of beauty that demanded attention, but a quiet, almost remote loveliness. Fine arched brows, a straight nose, lips pale and thin, like someone had painted them with the lightest touch of vermilion. But her eyes held no warmth. Not anger. Not tension. Not even calculated calm. It was something else, an almost pathological emptiness. Like a frozen lake in deep winter. Turbulent currents churned beneath, but the surface was so smooth you'd never guess what lay underneath. Helen had always hated that face. That dead, expressionless face Vera had worn her whole life. When Helen cursed her as a motherless child, Vera didn't cry. When Helen threw herself at Vera's feet begging to move back in after David got rich, Vera didn't smile. Was this woman even human? Did she have any feelings at all? Helen's irritation swelled. She checked the clock on the wall, 9:40. The notary and the lawyer were waiting in the next room. She couldn't wait any longer. Vera. Helen finally spoke, her voice shrill as fingernails on glass. I'd advise you to be smart about this and just sign the papers. Let's be civil. Don't make me do this the hard way. Vera didn't look up. Her eyes were still on the open page of the Civil Code, her elegant fingers resting lightly on the edge of the book, as if studying some profound text. Helen's temper flared. She slammed her palm on the rosewood table, hard enough that the lid of her teacup jumped with a sharp clatter, tea splashing onto the surface. Are you deaf? Helen's voice shot up an octave, piercing. Your father said it himself before he died. In writing. With his fingerprints. On video. The company, the 3 penthouses downtown, the 16 commercial properties, all of it, every bit, goes to Mark. You're a married daughter, you're out of this family. What right do you have to drag this out? The lawyer and notary are here today. Sign the papers. Don't try any tricks. Mark jumped at his mother's outburst. His phone chimed with a defeat sound effect. He tossed it onto the table, looked up with irritation, and sized up Vera with a lazy, dismissive glance. Cousin, he drawled, drawing out the word with a mocking lilt, my mom's right. Uncle's will says it clear as day. Don't make this awkward. You run some little counseling clinic, how much can that even make? Uncle left you that old house in the suburbs. It's a dump, sure, but it's still a roof. Take it while you can. Otherwise, you might end up with nothing at all. He grinned, showing teeth yellowed from years of smoking. Vera finally moved. Slowly, she raised her eyes. They passed over Mark's smirking face, just a fraction of a second, then settled on Helen's flushed, furious expression. The look was flat. Still as a windless lake. But Helen felt a chill creep up her spine. She'd seen that look before. The last time was 12 years ago, when Vera's mother lay in a hospital bed, doctors issuing the critical notice, David kneeling in the rain begging Helen for 10,000 yuan to cover the emergency treatment. Vera had stood at the hospital door, looking at her with those same eyes. Then she'd turned and walked away. The next day, Vera somehow found the money. But her mother died anyway. Helen had always told herself it was just a child's glare, nothing to worry about. But now, 12 years later, that same look was back, and the unease in her chest grew like weeds. Vera spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. In fact, it was quite soft. But something about those quiet words made the room fall dead silent. Even the background music from Mark's phone seemed suddenly intrusive. "Auntie, my father passed away at 3:20 a.m. on April 17th. Vera closed the civil code with a soft snap. "Today is April 24th. The seventh-day mourning period isn't even over yet." She paused, letting her gaze rest on Helen's suddenly frozen face. "My father's body is barely cold, and you've brought a lawyer and a notary to divide his estate. Isn't that a little early?" Helen looked like she'd been doused in ice water. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Of course she knew the mourning period wasn't over, but she couldn't wait. She'd heard whispers that Vera had been quietly meeting with top lawyers, looking into the company procurement department's books. She couldn't risk Vera getting ahead of her. Don't give me that crap." Mark leapt up again, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. He crossed to the table in 2 strides, jabbing a finger within inches of Vera's face. "Uncle made that will himself. He put his own fingerprint on it. He nodded on video. Mr. Zhang and 2 witnesses were there. Vera, you run some little counseling practice. What do you know about the law? The old man was generous leaving you that brick house. Take it and get lost. If you try anything, I'll take that back too, you hear me?" Spittle flew toward Vera's face. She didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. She just leaned back a fraction of an inch, putting a sliver of distance between herself and Mark's jabbing finger. Then her gaze shifted past him, to the man at the far end of the table who'd been silent until now. Mr. Zhang was in his early 50s, his hair immaculately combed, sharp eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. Helen had paid him handsomely. He was a well-known civil attorney in Hai Cheng's legal circles. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and rose, holding a neatly bound document. "Ms. Gu," he said, his tone professionally detached, "I am the attorney representing Ms. Helen Gu in the matter of David Gu's estate. I understand this is difficult, but I must lay out the legal facts." He opened the file and cleared his throat again. Under Articles 1134 through 1143 of the Civil Code regarding testamentary succession, the decedent, Mr. David Gu, executed this printed will while of sound mind and fully capable of civil conduct. 2 disinterested witnesses, Mr. Wang Daqiang and Mr. Li Dagong, were present throughout and signed as attestors. The process was documented with clear audio-visual recordings, in which Mr. Gu appears lucid and articulate, clearly stating that all his real estate, equity holdings, and cash assets are to be inherited exclusively by his nephew, Mr. Mark Su. Mr. Zhang paused and looked up. "From a legal standpoint, this will satisfy all formal and substantive requirements. If you refuse to cooperate with the transfer notarization, our client has every right to initiate legal proceedings. I'd advise you to consider the consequences carefully." He closed the file and sat back, clearly confident. Helen preened at his words, straightening her spine, crossing her arms, a cold smile curling her lips as she looked down at Vera. She looked like she already owned the fortune, like Vera was nothing but a beggar refusing to leave. The room fell quiet. The air conditioning hummed softly. The mingled odors of incense and cheap cologne swirled in the cold air. Helen waited for Vera's composure to crack. Mark settled back into his chair, legs crossed, feet jiggling impatiently. But what came wasn't Vera's surrender. It was a sound so soft it was almost inaudible. A breath. A laugh. The faintest curve tugged at the corner of Vera's lips. Not a twitch of anger. Not a bitter smile of despair. Something else. Mockery. The look of a cat watching a mouse run straight into the trap she'd set days ago. She reached down and picked up the Hermes briefcase at her feet, black, platinum edition, so understated it bore no visible logo, but the conoscenti would recognize it instantly, limited edition crocodile leather, special order, at least a year's wait. The clasp clicked open. She withdrew several files, each in a different colored folder, arranged neatly on the table. Then she stood and slid them to the center of the table, where Mr. Zhang and Helen could both see them clearly. Mr. Zhang. Vera sat back down, arms folded on the table, leaning slightly forward. Since you want to talk law, let's go through this piece by piece. Don't worry, we have all the time in the world. She pressed her index finger to the first folder. Her hand was exquisite, long slender fingers, defined knuckles, nails short and clean, no polish. She tapped the folder cover lightly, like keeping time. First, she said, her voice unhurried, this is a joint forensic psychiatric report from Haicheng First People's Hospital, Neurology and Mental Health Departments. It carries national-level forensic certification. She opened the folder, scanned the page, then turned it toward Mr. Zhang. From the early hours of April 14 through April 16, brainstem hemorrhage, deep coma, organic mental disorder. She tapped the conclusion column with her finger, reading each word aloud. This is from the hospital's neurology and mental health departments. Mr. Zhang, you're a legal professional, you tell me. Does a patient in deep coma with delirium have full civil capacity? Mr. Zhang's throat moved. He said nothing. No, Vera answered for him. The video shows him nodding, because you propped him up in a seated position and held his jaw. That fingerprint, you took his finger, dipped it in ink, and pressed it down. You could take a coma patient's hand and make him sign anything. Ask a judge if that counts as voluntary. Helen's face went white. She jumped to her feet, her chair scraping back half a meter. You're lying. You forged that report. My brother was wide awake the day he signed. He even drank some porridge. How dare you? Vera didn't even glance at her. Her eyes stayed fixed on Mr. Zhang, as if Helen's shrieking was nothing but a fly buzzing past. Forged? Vera said evenly. That'll be determined at trial. The forensic center's raw data, imaging, expert signatures, every bit of it can withstand any scrutiny. Mr. Zhang, you know that better than I do. Mr. Zhang's forehead was beaded with sweat. He dabbed at it with his sleeve, a small motion, but Vera caught it. She gave him no time to recover. She opened the second folder. Second. Her voice stayed calm, but each word was a nail. About those disinterested witnesses, Wang Daqiang and Li Dagang. She turned the files so both Mr. Zhang and Helen could see the printed photos and investigation records. Wang Daqiang, male, 47, Haicheng native, no steady employment. Frequent visitor to Macau casinos over the past 3 years. According to records I obtained from a third-party credit agency, Wang currently owes over 2 million yuan in gambling debts to loan sharks. And one of his creditors is Mark Su. She glanced up at Mark, whose face had gone rigid. 3 months ago, Mark made a single payment of 300,000 toward Wang's interest. I have the bank transfer records. As for Li Dagang. Vera flipped a page. Male, 39, certified public accountant. He has one registered company, a small consulting firm with 100,000 yuan in capital. Its sole shareholder and legal representative is Mark Su. In other words, Li Dagang is an employee of a shell company owned by Mark Su. His salary comes from Mark. Vera closed the folder and met Mr. Zhang's sweat-blurred gaze. Mr. Zhang, I'd like your professional opinion. Does a gambler who owes your client 2 million yuan count as disinterested? Does an employee whose salary your client pays? The civil code is quite clear, heirs, creditors, debtors, and business partners cannot serve as will witnesses. Mark is a statutory heir. Wang is his debtor. Li is his employee and debtor. Which of those two is legally qualified? She smiled faintly, a smile like smoke, barely there. Or have you, in all your years of practice, simply forgotten to do the most basic witness qualification check? Mr. Zhang's hands were trembling now. He pulled out a tissue and wiped his forehead, his back soaked with cold sweat, shirt sticking to his skin. He instinctively pushed his chair back, just a few centimeters, but everyone noticed. The distance between him and Helen had grown. Helen saw it too. Her face twisted with fury. She shot Mr. Zhang a venomous glare, then turned back to Vera. You bitch. You've been following us. Mark lunged again, chair scraping, fist raised. You want to die? Sit down. Vera's voice was barely above a whisper. But it froze him mid-step. Because as she spoke, the heavy door swung open. Two enormous men in black suits, earpieces, and mirrored sunglasses stepped in like iron towers. They took position behind Vera, for eyes scanning like searchlights, locked on Mark's every move. His fist was still clenched, but he couldn't move. He glanced at the bulges under their jackets, not guns, but batons, maybe tasers. His Adam's apple bobbed. He made a strangled sound and sat back down. Helen's eyes darted from the bodyguards to Vera. Something clicked. Vera had all but disappeared from the family mansion for 6 months. Helen had assumed she was sulking, retreating, defeated. But now, with the bodyguards, with those thick files, she understood. Vera had never retreated. She'd been waiting. Vera opened the third file. She didn't speak at first, just looked down at the dense spreadsheets and bank records, silent for several seconds. The silence stretched, each second thick as mud, and Helen could hear her own heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Then Vera looked up. Her gaze finally landed on Helen. There was no warmth, no pity, no hatred, just a chilling, bone-deep stillness. Third. Her voice dropped almost to a murmur, but every word was clear. Auntie, what have you and your son been doing in Tiancheng Medical's procurement department for the past 6 months? Would you like me to refresh your memory? Helen's pupils shrank to pinpricks. Her stomach twisted. Mark has been procurement manager for 3 years, starting the month after my father's company went public. Under the guise of equipment deposits and overseas raw material prepayments, you've used 12 shell suppliers to create false contracts, inflate invoices, siphon company funds, and pocket kickbacks from the actual vendors. Vera opened the file to reveal a flowchart and summary table. Of those 12 companies, 7 have legal representatives or actual controllers who are Helen's distant relatives, mahjong partners, or friends Mark met at nightclubs. All funds were laundered through 3 layers of transfers and eventually deposited into a personal offshore account under Mark's name. She pointed to the bottom of the summary table. Total, 45,723,800 yuan. I've included every last cent, Auntie. Thorough enough for you? Helen's mind exploded. A grenade had gone off in her skull. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, and her stomach lurched like she'd been punched. 45 million. Economic investigation. Her lips trembled, her face going gray beneath the layers of foundation. She opened her mouth, trying to scream, to claw at those files, but nothing came out. Impossible. She finally rasped, her voice dry as sandpaper. Mark was careful, the books were clean. How did you get the ledgers? How did you know about the offshore account? Vera studied her, a faint smile crossing her face, not triumphant, almost pitying. Auntie, you've forgotten what I do for a living. She leaned back, hands folded on the table, poised and graceful. I'm a psychologist. I know exactly what traces people leave when they do bad things. You thought balancing the books was enough. But on those nights Mark stayed late at the office drinking, thinking his safe was locked. I opened it 3 years ago with my father's spare key. And the internal network monitoring, did you think Mark was the only one with access? She tilted her head. The suppliers you used for those fake invoices. When they fell out over the kickback split, they sent each other threatening texts. I saved all of them. You didn't lack skill, Auntie. You lacked, she paused, the caution that should have tempered your greed. She closed the third file and rose. The hem of her suit jacket swayed slightly. Her trousers were creased to razor-sharp lines. She looked down at the ashen-faced mother and son. You thought I stayed away from the mansion because I was ashamed, didn't you? No. I was waiting. Waiting for you to pull the net tighter. Waiting for the amount to go from hundreds of thousands to tens of millions. Waiting for that number to become large enough, her eyes hardened, to ensure you'd never see freedom again. 10 years minimum, Auntie. Have you read Article 271 of the Criminal Code? Embezzlement of especially large amounts carries a sentence of 10 years to life. Mark, you're 24 now. When you get out, you'll be 44. She looked at his terror-twisted face. By then, you might not even remember what your mother looks like. Helen collapsed. All pretense of dignity gone, she lunged from her chair, arms flailing. A bodyguard caught her mid-air, shoving her back into her seat. She crumpled, face a ruined mess of tears and smeared makeup. Her voice cracked into pieces. You can't be this cruel. I'm your aunt. Mark is your cousin. If you send them away, what'll you have left? Your mother's gone, your father's gone, we're all you have. You'll be alone, completely alone. Her voice died on the last words, as if the thought frightened even her. Vera paused at the door. She turned her head, half her face lit by the warm yellow light of the VIP room, half in the cold white light from the corridor. A clean line bisected her features. For the first time all morning, something flickered in her eyes. Pure, sharp disgust. My aunt. Her voice was quiet, but each syllable was ice. Helen, you want to talk about family? She turned to face the woman whose tears had ruined her makeup. 22 years ago, my mother lay in a hospital bed with acute kidney failure. She needed emergency dialysis. The doctor said, pay 10,000 yuan now, and we'll do the surgery immediately. My father had just failed in business, he had less than 2,000 to his name. He called every relative. No one picked up. Finally he came to you. Vera's voice was flat, like she was telling someone else's story. What were you doing? Playing mahjong. You were on a winning streak. My father stood beside your table, soaked through, begging for 10,000 yuan to save his wife. And you said, David, that sick wife of yours isn't going to make it. Don't waste the money. I was going to use this 10,000 to buy a new table. Helen gaped, her tears mixing with mascara into black smears down her cheeks. Then my father knelt in the rain outside your door for 4 hours. You thought he was embarrassing you, so you set your wolf dog on him. He still has the scars on his calf. Vera's gaze moved from Helen to Mark's contorted face. Now you ask why I'm being cruel. Now you want to talk about family. She pulled the door open. Cold air rushed in, stirring the loose strands of her hair. She looked back one last time at the broken figures in their chairs. Everything you've done has been seen. Debts must be paid. What goes around comes around. Enjoy your last hours of freedom. Starting tomorrow, the Economic Investigation Unit will be in touch. I suggest you find a good criminal defense lawyer before then. She turned and walked out. Behind her, Helen's wails and Mark's fists pounding the rosewood desk echoed like drums of despair. The corridor's cold light fell on Vera, stretching her shadow long and straight. She pushed through the revolving doors of the notary building, and the sun hit her face, warm on her bare skin. She stood on the steps and breathed deep, eyes closed, letting the orange warmth soak through her lids. Dad, can you see this? She exhaled slowly, opened her eyes, and looked up at the line of blue sky between the buildings. This was only the beginning. Vera's counseling practice occupied the top floor of Cloud International Center, in the heart of the city. She'd spent an entire year perfecting it. The space was divided into several zones. The reception area had dark gray carpeting, warm cream walls, and a few low-saturation abstract paintings. The waiting area featured sleek imported armchairs, side tables with psychology journals and a small pot of living ivy. The air carried a faint scent of cedarwood oil from a silent diffuser in the corner. But through the soundproof glass door, Vera's private office was entirely different. It was quieter here, more private. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the winding river, where freighters left long wakes that caught the afternoon sun like scattered silver. The palette leaned cool, grays, whites, pale wood. A wide marble desk held only a pen holder, a computer, a never-ending cup of black coffee, and a small hourglass. Against the wall, hundreds of professional books stood neatly aligned, from Freud to Jung, cognitive behavioral therapy to criminal psychology, every spine worn from use. On the top shelf sat a single photo frame, alone. Vera returned to her office, hung her suit jacket on the rack, her white blouse still crisp and unwrinkled. She sat down, picked up her coffee, and took a sip. It was cold. The bitterness spread across her tongue. She frowned, swallowed it anyway, then her gaze drifted to the frame on the shelf. She rose, took it down, and sat back down. It was an old photograph, slightly yellowed. In it, Vera was 6 or 7, wearing a floral dress at least a size too big, her hair in crooked pigtails, standing under an old locust tree with a gap-toothed, carefree grin. Her left hand held a gentle, delicate woman, her mother, face pale with illness but smiling warmly, eyes curved like crescent moons. Her right arm was linked with a slightly awkward middle-aged man, David Gu, before he'd gained weight, in a cheap plaid shirt, his shave uneven, but his eyes full of steady hope as he looked at the camera. Vera's memory pulled her back. In those days, David worked as a shop floor technician at the Hai Cheng steel mill, making just over 300 yuan a month. Her mother was ill, always on medication, and most of the household income went to medicine. David rode a heavy old bicycle to and from work, with Vera's little stool strapped to the back. On cold days, he'd wrap his own winter coat around her and ride in just a thin sweater. One time Vera had a fever, and David carried her 4 kilometers on his back to the hospital. He wore through the soles of his rubber shoes. By the time he got home, his heels were bloody. Her mother cried as she applied the medicine, but David just smiled and said, "It's fine. I'm used to it." That was when the family was poorest, living in that red brick apartment in the old factory housing complex, no heat in winter, no air in summer. But the 3 smiles in that photograph were the brightest light Vera had ever known. She placed the frame face down on the desk and closed her eyes. Knock, knock. Before she could answer, the door cracked open. Lin Mubai poked his head in, a manila envelope in hand, a grin caught somewhere between teasing and genuine concern. "Boss," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him, settling into the chair across from her with practiced ease. "I heard about the notary office. Beautiful work, scare the tiger, pull the rug out. A classic 1-2 punch. But..." He slid the envelope across the desk, smile fading. "It's not over. I just got word, Helen and Mark aren't backing down. They've hired Shinguofu." Vera took another sip of her cold coffee, grimaced, and set it down. Shinguofu. Hai Cheng's notorious bulldog lawyer, Mubai said, crossing his legs. Specializes in defending deadbeats, crooked businessmen, and entitled rich kids. His specialty isn't winning, it's dragging things out. Motion after motion, appeal after appeal, bleeding the other side dry until their cash runs out and they give in. They call him the legal shark. If there's a loophole, he'll find it. He pulled a document from the envelope and handed it to her. Shen advised them to use this, a loan agreement with your father's signature, claiming he borrowed 30 million yuan from Mark for short-term working capital. Shen's going to use it to file for asset preservation, freezing Tiancheng Medical's equity and bank accounts, forcing you to the table. 30 million in cash. Vera glanced at the document and laughed. Mark's never had a real job in his life. Where would he get 30 million to lend my father? Even if he could, 3 years ago Tiancheng was in pre-IPO expansion mode, it had plenty of cash. It didn't need personal loans at high interest. Shen must be desperate if he's trying to pass this off. But the law is about evidence chains, Mubai said. Shen's not stupid. He's built a full narrative. Mark's gambling winnings in Macau, fake, obviously, laundered through underground banks, plus your father's signed receipt. The problem is, we had that signature analyzed. It's your father's handwriting. No alterations. He paused, voice dropping. I think Mark has some of your father's blank signed paper. You know how your dad loved calligraphy, he used to practice on stacks of rice paper. Mark lived in that mansion for 3 years. He had plenty of opportunities to slip into the study and take a few signed pages. All Shen has to do is print the loan terms on one of those sheets and forge a thumbprint. In the short term, proving it's fake is nearly impossible. Vera leaned back and was silent for a few seconds. Her fingers tapped lightly against the marble desk, barely audible. Outside, the afternoon sun shone bright over the river, where a white yacht drifted past in a slow arc, trailing a fan of ripples. She smiled, just slightly, only the corner of her mouth moving, but something flickered in her eyes, like a match struck in a dark room. Mubai, do you know what psychologists call the greed paradox? Mubai tilted his head. Tell me. Vera sat up, hands clasped on the desk. A profoundly greedy person, when faced with a huge opportunity, actively filters out all risk signals. They don't miss the traps, they believe they can win. They're smarter than everyone else. They can get away with anything. It's the same mechanism that makes a gambler believe the next hand will turn it all around. She held up the loan document, squinting at it against the light. Shen wants to drag this out legally. Fine. But I'll drag it out differently. He's attacking on the legal front. I'm going to pull Mark off that battlefield entirely. She set the document down and met his eyes. You know what a gambler can't resist. What? Not the feeling of winning, she said, her voice almost cold. It's the feeling of certainty. The chance to take everything without waiting, without risk, just reach out and grab the whole prize. She rose and walked to the window, her back to Mubai. Since they want to play big, I'll give them a gift they can't refuse. She was quiet for a moment, watching the white yacht turn on the river. Then she remembered a night a month ago. It had rained hard that night in Haicheng. She'd worn the plainest black hoodie she owned, a mask over her face, and walked into the bar Mark frequented. In a corner, Big Lou was drinking alone. Vera sat across from him and ordered 2 whiskeys. He looked up but didn't recognize her. Vera said only one thing, I'll clear your gambling debts. You do one thing for me. Big Lou's glass hovered mid-air for a long moment before he set it down. His eyes went from confused to wary to calculating to something like desperate resolve. What thing? Stay close to Mark. Tell me everything he says and does. She slid a bank card across the table. 300,000 up front. Another 300 when it's done. Enough to open a small grocery store back home. Big Lou stared at the card for a long time. Then he reached out with 3 fingers, slid it into his sock, and drained his whiskey in one gulp. Done. It rained all night. When Vera walked out of the bar, the rain was still falling. She didn't use an umbrella, just walked back to her office, shirt and hair soaked through. But that night, she knew the game had begun. 2 hours later, through 3 separate, untraceable channels, A blockbuster inside tip reached Mark at the upscale spa where he'd been lying low. The first channel was Big Lou. Big Lou usually just trailed Mark like a shadow, sponging free meals and drinks. Mark had never considered him useful. But today Big Lou burst into Mark's private suite without knocking, practically vibrating with excitement. Mark! Mark! Big news! Massive! Mark was lying face down on a massage table, a therapist in a short skirt working oil into his back. He didn't even open his eyes. What the hell, man? I'm relaxing here. Big Lou pulled the therapist aside and yanked Mark upright, lowering his voice, eyes blazing. I just heard from my brother-in-law, he's the deputy audit lead at Tiancheng Medical. He says a major U.S. medical group, Mayo International, is about to buy Tiancheng Medical for 2 billion yuan. Mark's yawn froze mid-motion. What? 2 billion. Yuan, not dollars, 2 billion. Big Lou counted on his fingers. Think about it, when Tiancheng gets bought, Vera's the sole shareholder. But she's stuck in that legal battle with you. The buyer wants clean equity before they'll sign. So Vera's panicking, she's quietly trying to offload her unlisted shares. Big Lou leaned in. She's selling 200 million worth of shares for 50 million, fire sale price, so she can take the cash and run abroad. Mark, this is the chance of a lifetime. If you can get those shares before she does, when Mayo comes in, you flip them for billions. Way faster than fighting over the inheritance. Mark's mind went blank. His ears rang. The numbers tumbled through his head, billions, not millions. More than the entire estate he and Helen had been scheming for. And faster, way faster. He hated waiting. Court dates, hearings, verdicts, appeals, a year or more. He didn't have a year. That 45 million hole was still there, and even though Vera hadn't blown it open yet, the Economic Investigation Unit would come knocking soon. He needed money, fast, to cover the tracks, to make the numbers disappear. If he could become a major shareholder before the acquisition closed, he could use his position to restate the accounts, write off those 45 million as normal operating losses. You're sure this is real? He grabbed Big Lou's collar, eyes red. 100%. My brother-in-law saw the Mayo letter of intent. And there was a memo from Tiancheng internals saying the IPO might be blocked by the equity dispute, advising management to offload the disputed shares ASAP. The memo got recalled, but he screenshotted it. Big Lou pulled out his phone and showed a blurry screenshot. Mark studied it, the logo and formatting looked exactly like Tiancheng's internal system. His breathing quickened. But... he frowned. Where the hell am I going to get 50 million in cash? Big Lou had been waiting for this. Mark, you idiot. He slapped the table. What do you have? You have Uncle's will. Sure, Vera's suing you for embezzlement, but until the court rules, you're still one of the legal heirs. You can use the mansion and those 3 downtown shops as collateral, borrow from Brother Lay's Jincheng lending. Brother Lay? That loan shark. Mark hesitated. His interest rates are insane. Who cares about interest? Big Lou shook Mark's shoulder. 1 week, 2 at most. Once the acquisition closes, your shares will be worth 10 times what you paid. Pay Brother Lay back and keep the rest. It's a free roll. Fortune favors the bold. The hesitation in Mark's eyes evaporated like frost in the sun. Greed burned through him, hot and blinding. His stomach churned with excitement. He could taste it, the money, the freedom, the revenge. He jumped off the table, grabbing a robe. Let's go, I need to talk to my mother. What he didn't see was Big Lou quickly tapping out a 3-word message, fish on hook. That message crossed Hai Cheng's cell towers in seconds and arrived at the cedar-scented office at Cloud International Center. Vera's phone vibrated softly on the desk. She glanced at it, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly, then placed the phone face down. Across from her sat a man with a sharp, cold face and razor eyes, Lu Li, deputy head of Hai Cheng's Economic Investigation Unit, and her senior from university, a law student who'd been president of the student council when she was in psychology. Vera was making tea. Her movements were fluid and precise, warming the cups, adding the leaves, rinsing them, steeping, pouring. Deep amber tea streamed into white porcelain, releasing a mist scented with orchid. She slid the cup toward Lu Li. Here, senior. This year's Feng Huang Dan Song. Lu Li didn't drink immediately. He glanced at her phone, then at her face, and shook his head. Vera, you move fast. I just got word, Helen and Mark formally filed the collateral application with Jincheng Lending this afternoon. The 50 million should hit Mark's account tomorrow morning if everything goes smoothly. He paused, took a sip. The orchid aroma spread across his tongue. He nodded approval, then set the cup down, expression hardening. Also, the preliminary audit of Tiancheng's procurement department is in. It's worse than we expected. Fake contracts, fake invoices, forged seals. Mark didn't even bother with basic cover-ups, most of the vendor addresses are the same street in the same slum. The evidence chain is airtight. This is embezzlement on a particularly large scale, we can arrest him now if we need to. Thank you, senior. Vera smiled faintly, pouring herself a cup. They didn't bother with cover-ups because my father's trust, his generosity, made them feel like Tiancheng was their personal piggy bank. Greed blinds people. It always has. Lu Li set his cup down, rubbing the rim with his fingertip. You're really going to sell those shares to Mark? That's entrapment, or close to it. Even if you're technically within the law, if his lawyer argues induced crime, it could backfire on you. Vera sipped her tea, then pulled a contract from her drawer and slid it across the table. Senior, read this carefully. What am I really selling him? Lu Li flipped through it, then raised an eyebrow. Tiancheng Medical Equipment Leasing Company, Limited. Exactly, Vera said. Tiancheng Medical is the parent company, high-end R&D and manufacturing. Tiancheng Equipment Leasing was a subsidiary my father set up 2 years ago to expand into the secondary market, short-term rentals of used gear. It never turned a profit. A year ago it was already insolvent and in bankruptcy proceedings. She tapped the contract. Every memo and email I leaked used vague terms like Tiancheng-related entities and Tiancheng subsidiary assets. That's commercially reasonable language, no false statements. Mark's lawyer, Shen Guofu, didn't even do the basic due diligence at the industry bureau. The bold fox was too busy gloating. Lu Li stared at the contract for a long moment. A chill ran down his spine. Psychology was sometimes deadlier than any weapon. Vera had exploited Mark's greed, Shen's arrogance, and turned a legal trap into a feast. And the forged loan receipt? Lu Li asked. If he gets that asset freeze, it'll still disrupt the parent company's supply chain and bank lines. How do you deal with that? Vera took out a small voice recorder and an old, dog-eared medical chart. Here's the truth I've been holding. She spun the recorder gently on the desk, sunlight catching its metal body. Shen thinks those signed blank pages were stolen. He doesn't know my father left them deliberately. Her eyes reddened slightly, the first real emotion she'd shown all day. 6 months ago, when my father was diagnosed with a brainstem tumor, he already suspected Helen and Mark were cooking the books. But he couldn't bring himself to send his own sister to prison. So he made a compromise. He signed blank pages and left them in his study safe, making sure Mark saw where he kept the key. She opened the old chart, pulling out a yellowed letter in her father's strong, slightly shaky calligraphy. He wrote, If Helen and Mark stop here, those signed pages are Mark's last lifeline. If they ever get caught for embezzlement, my father's signature could be used to create a loan agreement, transferring some assets legally to protect them. Her voice trembled, but she held back the tears. But if they get greedy, if they go beyond the millions they've already stolen and try to take everything, those pages become the trap that destroys them. She looked up, eyes red but steel hard. My father gave them a chance. In the recorded will, he even said, Vera, if they back down, burn the pages. They didn't back down. Instead, they hired a lawyer to come after me. She folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the chart. They took the last way out and turned it into the noose around their own necks. Luli was silent. He stared into his cooling tea, watching his own reflection waver in the amber liquid. Vera, he finally said, his voice lower than before, your father, he was a hard man. Vera didn't answer. She placed the chart in her drawer and closed it with a soft click. He was soft, she said. Not hard. He couldn't bear to see anyone suffer, even people who didn't deserve his mercy. Luli looked at her, but said nothing more. 3 days later, Haicheng Intermediate People's Court, 3rd Civil Division. It was a closed hearing, but with billions in assets at stake and such intimate family ties, word had spread through the legal community. A few enterprising reporters huddled by the flower beds outside, telephoto lenses ready. The courtroom wasn't large, only a dozen or so observers sat in the public gallery. Vera had brought only Mubai and 2 assistants. Helen had brought several relatives from her side, their faces bright with the excitement of spectators at a public execution. A few legal professionals, likely brought by Shen to lend him credibility, also sat scattered in the back. The gallery was stifling. The air conditioning blasted cold from the ceiling vents. At the plaintiff's table, Mark looked the part of a man about to inherit a fortune, a new blue Armani suit, peaked lapels, a white silk square in the breast pocket. His hair was gelled back, his posture stiff, hands clasped on the table, a grin he couldn't suppress plastered across his face. The 50 million had hit his account. The share transfer agreement was signed. He hadn't filed it with the Commerce Bureau yet, but he was already spending the money in his head. He'd barely slept the night before, running numbers in his head. 50 million borrowed. Acquisition closes. Shares become 200 million. Pay back brother Lay. Still have 100 million. Vera would cry. He'd be on a private jet to the Maldives. He'd already looked up resort bungalows with private pools and taken screenshots. Helen sat beside him, dripping with gold and jade, the imperial green pendant glowing under the fluorescent lights. Her head was high, her eyes darting to Vera's side with barely contained malice. She'd rehearsed the moment, Vera walking out empty-handed, defeated, humiliated, she would savor it. At the defendant's table, Vera wore the same charcoal suit, her thermos of hot water, and the worn civil code. Her expression was almost detached, as if she were observing a lecture rather than fighting for her inheritance. Beside her, Mubai, in his navy barrister's robe, tie perfect, had nothing on his table but a pen and a blank notepad. He leaned back like he was on vacation. At the council table on the right, Shen sat, massive in his darker robe, with at least 7 file boxes stacked around him, each labeled in dense handwriting. He'd prepared thoroughly, gone over every estate law, hired a handwriting expert to vouch for the loan receipt. He hadn't bothered to verify the witnesses' identities. When Mark had said, "I'll get some friends to sign," Shen had been distracted by another case and just nodded. The judge entered. Gavel. Haicheng Intermediate People's Court, 3rd Civil Division, is now in session. The case concerns inheritance and debt disputes. Plaintiff Mark Su and Helen Gu. Defendant Vera Gu. Does either party have objections to the presiding judges? No. No. Plaintiffs, present your complaint. Shen rose with theatrical gravity. Your Honor. My client, Mark Su, is the nephew of the decedent, David Gu. Mr. Gu, in appreciation of his nephew's filial devotion and contributions to the company, executed a printed will on April 15 of this year at Haicheng First Hospital's intensive care unit. He held up a copy. We have a will, signed, witnessed, recorded on video. Mr. Gu's instructions were clear: everything goes to his nephew, Mark Su. The daughter receives a single 65 square meter red brick house in the eastern suburb, as a token. He paused, throwing a professional pitying glance at Vera. Additionally, Shen continued, pulling out a yellowed receipt, we have a loan receipt signed by David Gu, acknowledging a 30 million yuan personal loan from my client for company working capital. The debt remains unpaid. We request that the defendant satisfy this debt from the estate before any distribution. His voice rang out confidently in the courtroom. A stir in the gallery. Helen's relatives exchanged knowing looks. Shen glanced at Mubai, almost daring him. Mubai didn't react. He was doodling on his notepad, a lopsided turtle. Vera's eyes remained on her civil code, fingers resting on the pages. Defense, the judge said. Mubai rose unhurriedly. He didn't straighten his robe, just folded his doodle and slipped it into his pocket. He looked like a cat blinking awake in the sun. Your Honor. The plaintiff's will and loan receipt are forgeries, products of malicious collusion, and legally invalid. We reject all claims and will file a counterclaim. A counterclaim? Mark almost laughed out loud. He half rose, pointing at Vera. You have no grounds. Uncle signed it himself. He nodded on video. He pressed his own thumbprint. Vera, if you can't handle losing, don't waste the court's time. Plaintiff, I warn you, the judge said sharply. Any further disruption, and I'll hold you in contempt. Mark sank back, but his smugness remained. Mubai submitted the first evidence. Your Honor, this is the National Forensic Center's report on the loan receipt signature and fingerprint dates. He read, the signature, David Gu, is indeed the decedent's. However, spectral and chemical analysis show the ink was applied approximately 3 years ago. The printed text below, I hereby acknowledge borrowing 30 million yuan cash from Mark Su, and the fingerprint, date, and ID number, were applied approximately 2 weeks ago. He closed the report and tilted his head at Shen. In other words, this is a forgery, assembled from a blank signed page from 3 years ago and a printed document from 2 weeks ago. Mr. Shen, with all your years of experience, surely you could spot such a clumsy fabrication. Shen's face went rigid. He hissed at Mark, you said he signed this on his deathbed. Mark stammered, I took it from Uncle's safe. I thought he'd written it before. I thought no one would check. Shen forced himself to recover. Your Honor, even if the receipt is disputed, the will itself is valid. The video is clear, the formalities complete. The validity of the will is unaffected. Then a clear voice cut through the courtroom. About the will, I have something to add. Vera rose slowly, stepping forward half a pace, her gaze passing over Shen and Mark and settling on Helen. Auntie, she said, each word like a crystal striking stone, did you really think my father was so confused in those final days that he couldn't see what you were doing? She reached into her jacket and withdrew an old silver voice recorder, its paint chipped, a faded pink sticker of a cartoon bunny still clinging to it, the sticker she'd put there as a child, the same recorder her father had used for decades. Your Honor, I submit the core evidence for our counterclaim, an audio recording made by David Gu before his death, and a sealed secret will notarized at the Guixin notary office. She handed them to the clerk. The courtroom went taut. After a few seconds of adjustment, the audio system crackled, then a voice came through, old, weak, but utterly determined. I am David Gu, legal representative of Tiancheng Medical Equipment Company. I don't know what day this is, it might be next year, or the year after. But if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and there are things I need to say. Coughing. Labored breathing. Vera, my daughter. I've failed you, and your mother. The proudest thing I ever did was having you. But I made one terrible mistake, I let Helen back into our lives. And I've raised 2 vipers. Helen's face drained of color. 2 years ago, I installed security cameras in my study. One night, I got an alert, Mark, in the middle of the night, in my study, opening my safe, taking blank pages I'd signed. A tremor in the recording. I knew then what they were planning. I could have thrown them out. But I couldn't. She's my sister. He's my nephew. I told myself if they just took a little, I'd look the other way. But they wanted more. Silence in the courtroom. Vera's fingers dug into the table's edge, knuckles white. When she heard of Vera, my daughter, her head dropped for just a moment. Her jaw clenched, and no one saw her lips tremble. When she looked up, her face was clear again, except for the faint flush, like a fresh wound. The first thing I did was seal this recording in my secret will at the notary office. The condition, if Helen and Mark used my signatures to commit fraud, the secret will would activate. The second thing I did, was this. David's voice grew heavier. I, David Gu, with full and sound mind, hereby declare, Helen Gu and Mark Su are entirely disinherited. All my assets, Tiancheng medical shares, 3 downtown properties, 16 commercial shops, bank deposits, shall be inherited solely by my daughter, Vera Gu. I gave you a chance. I put the safe key where you could find it. But you didn't take it. A long, soft sigh. Vera, don't grieve too long. Live well. For your mother. For me. A click. The courtroom was dead silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Helen slumped, her body like an empty sack. She stared, mouth open, eyes bulging. Her brother, the quiet, hapless one she'd mocked all her life, had seen through everything and set this trap 2 years ago. Mark lunged to his feet. Lies. AI generated. Vera, you forged this. You. A bailiff shoved him back. The judge hammered his gavel. Plaintiff, any further outburst and I'll have you jailed. Mark was pinned to his seat, face purple. Shen was ashen. He looked at his file boxes, all that work, wasted. He'd heard that recording. The voice, the coughs, the rhythm, no AI could fake it. It was real. He looked at Vera. Still standing, still calm, eyes red at the rims but spine straight as a bowstring. Shen understood, finally. From the notary office to this courtroom, he'd thought he was fighting some girl with a counseling degree. But he'd been fighting someone colder, more meticulous, more perceptive than he was. His voice was hoarse. The defense has nothing further. He sat, dropping his pen. The judge conferred briefly with his colleagues. This court, after due deliberation, finds, the plaintiff's will is invalid, executed when the decedent lacked civil capacity, with unqualified witnesses. The loan receipt is a forgery. The decedent's secret will is valid. All assets are inherited by Vera Gu. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed. Costs assigned to the plaintiffs. The gavel fell. A crisp, final sound. Vera closed her eyes. No smile. No tears. Just stillness for a few seconds. Her father's last words echoed, "Live well. Dad. I got it back." She opened her eyes and met Mubai's grin. Helen was crumpled on the floor, sobbing. No, he wouldn't. I'm his sister. Mark charged for the door. It burst open before he reached it. Several huge men in black flooded in, led by a bald man with a thick gold chain. Mark Sue. Stop right there. It was Brother Lei. The true power behind Jincheng Lending, a 20-year veteran of the street. On paper, Jincheng was a legitimate microlender, license, tax registration, standard contracts. But everyone knew Brother Lei did 9 in, 13 out lending. Once you owed him, he'd grind you down to bone. 7 or 8 thugs flanked him, packing the doorway. Mark froze, trying to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. Brother Lei. He stammered. You said payments weren't due until next week. Next week? Lei spat on the marble floor, slapping a contract across Mark's face. I want my money now. 50 million. Today. But the loan was only 3 days ago. Mark's hands were shaking around the contract. The contract said 3 months. 3 months? Lei grabbed Mark's Armani lapels, pulling him up an inch, face to face, his smoky breath in Mark's nostrils. You tried to collateralize my loan with shares from a bankrupt company. And you want to talk contracts? Bankrupt? Mark struggled. Those are Tiancheng Medical shares. 200 million in original stock. I signed the agreement. Open your eyes. Lei shoved the contract in his face, pointing at the fine print. Tiancheng Medical Equipment Leasing Company, Limited. Declared bankrupt this morning. 300% debt to asset. You put up a bankrupt company as collateral for 50 million. That's fraud. Mark's mind exploded. Equipment leasing. He'd been so focused on Tiancheng that he'd missed the rest. Shen had been too busy arguing to check the registry. No. Mark's face went white. Vera said, she said it was unlisted stock. She told me. Ms. Gu completed the transfer of parent company shares this morning. With the court's judgment, those shares are clean. They've got nothing to do with you. You tried to use her shares to scam me. Count yourself lucky I don't break your legs. Mark nearly collapsed. Helen lunged forward, makeup a black ruin across her face. Brother Lei. We still have the mansion. The 3 downtown shops. They're collateral. Mansion. Shops. Lei laughed. You just heard the verdict. The house and shops belong to Vera Gu. You're trying to give me someone else's property. I've been in this business 20 years and I've never met a bigger crook. He released Mark and waved. Boys, take their keys, their watches, their phones. And those clothes, the ones that aren't theirs, throw them on the street. The thugs swarmed. Mark's Patek Philippe was ripped off, his cufflinks, car keys, even his belt buckle. Helen screamed as her jade pendant was yanked away, leaving a red mark on her neck, her pearl earring torn off, a drop of blood on her lobe. Chaos at the courtroom door. The gallery cowered. Vera stood behind the defendant's table, watching. She saw Lei grab Mark's collar, the Armani jacket twist sideways, the jade pendant come off. Her lashes flickered. For an instant, she remembered her father's faded plaid shirt. The collar worn through, her mother's careful stitches, 3 of them, in matching thread, invisible at a glance. They'd been so poor they couldn't afford a new shirt. But every day, her father would come home from the factory, scoop her up, and scratch her cheek with his stubble. When Helen's earring was torn off, Vera closed her eyes. Her chest tightened. She forced herself to breathe. When she opened them, they were empty again. Mark was being dragged out by 2 thugs when he caught sight of her. His eyes went bloodshot. He twisted back, screaming hoarsely. Vera! You did this. You set me up. You made me borrow. You sold me that bankrupt shell. You planned it all. That's your own aunt. Are you even human? Vera stepped out from behind the defendant's table, her heels clicking across the floor. She stopped a meter away, looking down at his wild, bloodshot eyes. "Mark," she said softly, "did I force you to steal my father's signed paper? Did I force you to embezzle 45 million? Did I force you to borrow from a loan shark? You chose every single path. Greed was your poison. The law was your end. All I did was provide a stage." She turned and walked out. Outside, the sun was blinding. 2 police SUVs with flashing lights pulled up at the courthouse steps. Men in uniform jumped out with arrest warrants and detention orders. They passed Vera, one nodded respectfully. She nodded back and kept walking. Behind her, the formal words, "Mark Sue, Helen Gu. You are under arrest for embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, and fraud. Please cooperate." Cuffs clicked around Mark's wrists. He collapsed, sobbing. "It wasn't me. Vera set me up." Helen was silent, letting the police cuff her. Then, as Vera's figure retreated down the sunlit steps, she found her voice. "Vera. You can't leave. I'm your aunt. Your father's gone, we're the only family you have. Please, talk to them, give the money back to Lei, we'll go home, we'll never." Vera didn't stop. She walked down the steps, into the plaza. Summer wind carried the river's dampness across her face, stirring her hair. She didn't look back. The sun stretched her shadow long and thin behind her, reaching all the way to the courthouse's heavy doors, just short of Helen's outstretched hands. Close. But never close enough. Mubai caught up. "How do you feel?" Vera took a breath, then smiled faintly. "Hungry. Let's get lunch." Mubai grinned. "There's a good place nearby. Beef hot pot." He started walking, then turned. "The old factory housing, when are you going?" Vera looked past the skyline, past the high-rises, to a cluster of red brick buildings far away. The old district had been designated a historical preservation zone now, with locust trees spilling green through the gaps. "Now," she said. The old housing complex lay on the eastern edge of the city, next to a disused freight rail line. These red brick buildings dated from the late 80s, staff quarters for the Hai Ching steel mill. Most of the mill workers had left years ago, but a few elderly tenants and newcomers had stayed. Recently the government had turned the area into a preservation district, repaving the roads, installing streetlights, planting gardens. Vera's childhood was here. She stood in front of Building 7, looking up at the rusted green window frames on the 3rd floor. A faded blue curtain still hung there, a repurposed bedsheet her mother had sewn. The family had lived in a small 2-bedroom, barely 60 square meters, freezing in winter, baking in summer. But Vera remembered it as the warmest place in the world. The old locust tree still stood by the entrance. It was thicker now, 2 arm spans around. Its canopy shaded half the courtyard, sunlight filtering through in tiny golden coins on the dirt and brick. Vera touched the rough bark. Her childhood initials, VGG, still carved there, crooked, almost worn away by decades of weather. She knelt and felt around the loose brick on the north side of the roots. The one she'd discovered as a child, hiding behind the tree during a game, her heel striking something hollow. She'd shown that secret to only one person. Her father. David had smiled, good place to hide treasure. She lifted the brick. Beneath was damp earth, moss, tiny ferns. Buried there, a small rusted metal tea tin, round, the lid stamped with faded red characters, Jasmine tea. She dug it out, brushed off the mud. The lid was stuck, she pried it open with some effort. Inside, a sheet of folded rice paper. Yellowed, damp at the edges, but the writing clear, David's familiar calligraphy, the same hand as in the recording. But this one was addressed only to her. She unfolded it. "Vera, my daughter, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't cry. You never did, like your mother. That always reassured me. Under this locust tree, you used to play when you were little. I'd come home from work and see you from a distance, crouched on the roots in your braids, counting ants. In those days I couldn't even afford an ice pop for you without thinking twice. But you never asked. You always said, "Dad, I don't need anything, save the money for Mom's medicine." 6 years old, and already so thoughtful. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Then we got rich, moved to a big house, and I grew distant. Work consumed me. After your mother died, I couldn't bear the silence, so when Helen came asking for help, I said yes. I thought if the house was full, I'd feel less empty. I didn't realize I was inviting wolves inside. I'm sorry, Vera. I brought a wolf and a weasel into our home and left you to fend for yourself. You never complained, but I knew your life wasn't easy. You're like your mother, you never asked for help. But I knew you were smarter than me. Always were. So I trusted you to handle whatever came. Under this letter are blank pages with my signature. I put them in my safe and made sure Mark saw the key. If they take a little, let it be. If they go too far, those pages are yours to use however you see fit. Don't hate your aunt. Life hasn't been kind to her. Greed is a weed, once it takes root, it's almost impossible to pull out. I don't regret taking them in, because without that, I might never have seen their true nature, and I wouldn't have left these defenses. Vera, live well. If the company becomes a burden, sell it and do what you love. Travel. Go to Dolly, like your mother always wanted. She said the Arai lake there is clear as a mirror. Go for her, and for me. One last thing, don't hate anyone. Hate is a cage, and it locks you in. I spent too much of my life in that cage. Don't follow my path. Dad. The date was last autumn, 6 months before the recording. Vera held the letter under the locust tree for a long time. Afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling her shoulders. A breeze shook the branches above, their rustling like voices. She folded the letter carefully, returned it to the tin, buried it again, and covered it with the loose brick. She stood, pressed her palm against the rough bark. Dad, she said softly, I'll go to Arai for you. In autumn. She didn't cry. She just stood under the tree, looked up at the bright green canopy, and breathed in deep and slow. Sun warm. Wind soft. In the distance, a freight train rumbled past the old tracks, rhythmic, steady, like the pulse of time itself. A month later. The visitation room at Hai Cheng Detention Center smelled of disinfectant and rust. Bulletproof glass separated two worlds, one free but cold, the other narrow and desperate. Vera sat on the outside, in a pale blue linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to her forearms, a thin silver bracelet on her wrist, her hair tied low. She looked thinner than a month ago, but her eyes held a quiet calm. Through the glass, Helen and Mark sat in orange jumpsuits, cuffs on their wrists, hollowed out. A month in prison had changed them completely. Helen's hair was half white, her cheeks sunken, dark bags under her eyes, lips cracked. The proud society matron was gone. Mark was worse. His stylish undercut had been shaved to a uniform stubble, his face was gaunt, cheekbones jutting, eyes dull and glassy. His left hand trembled constantly. Helen lunged at the glass. Vera. Vera, you came. Please, talk to the judge. I'm 53, 12 years, I'll be 65 when I get out, I won't survive. Vera picked up the phone. Auntie, the verdict is final. Mark got 20 years. You got 12. I can't change that. The judges were paid off. Helen sobbed. I'll give the money back, all 45 million, plus the 50 from Lay. Talk to Officer Liu, ask for a reduction. Mom. Stop begging her. Mark slammed the counter, cuffs ringing. Vera, you're not so smug now, are you? Karma will find you. Tiancheng will go under. You've got nothing, no family, no one, you're alone. Vera watched his twisted face without reacting. She waited for his manic laughter to fade to ragged breathing. Mark, she said softly, you still think someone else is to blame. His eyes stayed red and fixed on her. Something I think you should know, she said, her voice cool and clear. The acquisition news, it was true. The sobbing stopped. Both froze. The buyer wasn't requiring clean equity, she said, leaning forward. I initiated the partnership. This morning, Tiancheng Medical signed the acquisition agreement with Mayo International. As sole shareholder, I'll receive cash and shares totaling 2.2 billion yuan. Mark's lips twitched. But, she said, sitting back, I'm keeping none of it. I've set up the Tiancheng Medical Assistance Foundation. All 2.2 billion goes into it. It will cover medical costs for underprivileged patients, just like my mother. She looked at them. My father said, wealth comes from society, and should return to it. You risked everything, years in prison, a ruined name, for a fortune I saw only as a tool to fulfill my parents' wishes. You got prison time and disgrace, she said, her smile small and gentle. I gave away the fortune, but my father's name will live in grateful patients' letters, carved into the foundation stone of the charity hospital. That, she said, is the difference between you and me. She hung up the phone and walked away. Helen's sobbing and Mark's fists on the glass faded behind her, muffled through the bulletproof pane like a sound underwater. Vera pushed open the heavy prison gate. Sunlight flooded in. Late May, full summer. The sky a brilliant blue, white clouds scattered like cotton. Red roses bloomed in the beds by the entrance. Mubai leaned against the car, handed her a bottle of water. How'd it go? Okay. She sipped, looked up at the sky. Quieter than I expected. Luli leaned out of the driver's seat, phone in hand. Shen's been suspended by the Bar Association, criminal investigation pending. And Big Lou called this morning, he's using your fee to open a grocery store back home. Done with all this. Vera smiled. Good. Everyone deserves a fresh start. Mubai opened the door. Back to the office. Vera shook her head. She looked back at the detention center sign, then up at the cloudless sky. No, she said, capping the water bottle, pocketing it. I booked a flight to Dali tonight. My father said, the lake there is like a mirror. She walked toward the parking lot, summer wind carrying rose fragrance, lifting her shirt hem and the loose strands of her hair. Sunlight caught her slim shoulders, stretching her shadow long behind her toward the endless blue. Mubai and Luli watched her go, sharing a look, saying nothing. A ship's horn sounded in the distance. Outside, the city glowed under the moon. And for the first time in years, Vera didn't feel like she was standing outside someone else's life. She was right where she belonged.